welcome to this November bullet journal plan with me video. Today we have this blue and gold theme to set up, which will kinda ease us into the winter season. And let's just get started right away. We're gonna start today from this cover page painting, for which we'll use watercolors to paint this small white bird, which is actually a native species from Hokkaido Island here in Japan. This bird is called Shima Enaga, and we were just traveling in Hokkaido with my husband, which gave me the idea to make a theme featuring these absolutely adorable birds. But before jumping in with the watercolors, we're gonna do a quick pencil sketch to establish the placement and size of the bird in this picture. Having clear outlines for it will also help us to go around this area when we are painting the background. But yeah, it took me a few tries to get the shape of this bird right. There's something so difficult about drawing very fluffy animals because the initial outlines without the coloring or any of the shadows will look a little bit weird at first. So don't be too hard on yourself in this step. I would say that the face is probably the most important part at this stage, and the body and the wings will transform a lot with the colors. I eventually decided to turn the head a little bit because I felt like it was easier to draw the eyes from this angle. But after we are done drawing the bird, we are ready to move on to the coloring phase, and I actually used my new set of watercolors in this video. These are from Winsor & Newton, and this was my first time doing a real painting with this set. I had only swatched these colors, so I was a little bit nervous, but eventually everything worked out just fine, and I was so impressed with these paints. I know I will enjoy these many years from now. Anyway, we're gonna start by painting the background first because there won't be much happening in the background, and I thought it would be easier to work in this order. So to get this very smooth, blurry effect, we're gonna use a wet on wet technique, which means that we are first applying a layer of clear water on this whole background and then add the color on this wet surface. I was trying to be very careful here when going around the bird, and I was following the outlines of this sketch, so this will allow us to leave this white empty space for the bird, and you'll see how the colors will melt together everywhere we apply the water here. But after that we can start to blend the colors, and I went for some pretty cool toned grayish blue tones here. But I did mix some raw umber and burnt umber that gave this light brownish effect. I tried to add a little bit more intensity towards the corners and create some variation in the background in general. This is also one of those paintings where you could completely switch the color of this background, and you could use the same painting for different colored theme as well. The rest of the colors we're going to use in the bird are all very neutral, so they would definitely work with many different background options. But then the last thing I added to the background were these brown branch shapes. I know these won't look like much right now, but I wanted there to be a few blurry branches like this so that it adds a little bit more depth to the picture, and later we'll add just a few branches here also at the end. But now we will let the background layer completely dry, and after that we can start coloring the bird. So now we are working with a smaller brush, and we are also not applying the clear water layer here. So this dry on wet technique allows us to create much sharper shapes and details. I started by kind of just adding these different color areas that work as the base layers for the rest of the details. I think it's always a pretty good idea to start from very light colors because we can always intensify them later, but it's difficult to take anything back with watercolors. So slow and steady is usually a pretty good strategy. Then after the base layers, we can start building the details on top. I painted the face with this super tiny brush that I also used to create some small feather strokes or a bit more fluffy appearance to the rest of the body. I think leaving the white highlights to the eyes is definitely a key thing to make a little bit cuter expression for this bird. And you can see that even though the face is supposed to be white, we are still gonna add some shadows to it to create the shapes we need. But anyway, I also used a small brush to add some shadows to the wings. So this is how we're just slowly building details on top of the previous layers, and it will start to bring a more realistic appearance to the whole picture. Leaving white areas is very difficult to do when coloring something like this. So to bring back some white details, I actually took out my white gouache paint and just added a few more fur strokes and some highlights to the wings with this white paint. I also used this to add some snowflakes to the background. I don't know if this painting turned out a little bit too wintry. I don't know if November is considered as a winter month, but apparently that's what we're gonna do here. Anyway, after adding the last few branches and the snowflakes to the background, we are finally done with our first cover painting. So now it was time to just remove all the washi tapes from the borders and reveal our beautiful clean edges, and then we will attach this painting to the notebook. However, I actually wanted to use this darker blue craft paper that was just calling my name this month. I've had this in my closet for a while and I just never used it for some reason, but I thought that this theme would be perfect to highlight this beautiful blue tone. So I actually added this under the painting, so we'll get this dark frame around it, and we are also gonna add some more details to the right page. But first we will create a Dutch door here by cutting this right page, and we'll use this to hide the November calendar behind this cover spread. I wanted to make this a little bit more interesting, so we are creating these half circles along the Dutch door edge, and it also allows us now to make a cute lace border for it. However, I started by first writing the November title here, and I wanted to get an excuse to use my gold paint that hasn't gotten nearly enough love in the past months. I think this shade is called Moon Gold or something like that. It's from my Pearl paint palette, and it has this champagne gold undertone instead of being more typical yellow gold. So I think this color went so beautifully with these blue and grayish tones. I wrote this title first with a pencil, which makes it much easier to trace the letters with the paint and this small brush. You might also need to go over the lines maybe 2 or 3 times to really make the paint opaque on a darker background like this. But after the title, I took out a white paint pen. I really liked this one from my Artistro pen collection. It's a little bit runnier than some of my other white pens, so it's maybe not the thickest or most opaque, but it also doesn't dry or get clogged nearly as easily, so I've really enjoyed how easy it's been to use. But when it comes to the decorations here, I didn't really have anything specific in mind, so I was just drawing some random flowers and dot decorations, which I think looks so pretty on this darker background. You could even create a much bigger lace effect if you want here, but I was afraid of messing things up here by adding too much of everything, so I went with this pretty small edge decoration. In the end, I really liked how this cover page ended up. This tone of petrol blue is one of my favorite colors in general, so I'm so happy I could use it for this theme. But now that we're done with the cover portion, let's flip to the inside of the Dutch store to set up the monthly calendar. I started here by lining the whole area with the gold paint, and after that we're gonna create a very simple floating calendar. To be honest, I didn't really know what decorations to add here because I liked how the right side edge looked on the cover page side when it was just very simple like this. So eventually I just filled this whole space with the calendar and just call it a day. This is definitely one of those pages that I might retouch with some stickers or washi tapes later. Just add a little bit more color in here maybe. Planning section. I wanted to use some pretty easy decoration methods here. Large areas like this when you work directly in the notebook paper, but if you don't blend too much, it will definitely work out. Also, to prevent the edges from curling too much, I like to use a bit more flat. So I wanted to use these grayish blue tones again to add this almost misty appearance to a really nice look to a spread in my opinion, especially if you combine this method with layering some papers for the boxes and titles. After the decor, but the word was a little bit too long for this space, so that's why I went with plans instead. I used this serif style font to make the letters a little bit darker and bulkier against the background. There are many fonts in this style, so you could, for example, search for Georgia font on Google and you'll get a picture of the whole alphabet that you can use as your guide while drawing these letters. I always think it's easier to sketch everything with a pencil beforehand, especially if you're not sure how clean. You could even use a ruler when going monthly planning content. I sometimes get asked to explain more of how overall monthly plan. I've been bullet journaling for years at this point, and more I started to feel like the overall plan is even more helpful to me than having daily to-do lists or habit trackers or something like that. So how I do it is in the very beginning of each month, I usually fill this kind of planning page, and I always make these questions of what's the monthly focus, and I also like to leave room to write a small time plan for whatever it is that you want to accomplish. Personally, I always feel so much better after writing down a few things that I really want to focus on, because now I have this clear vision of what needs to hide these bigger things into smaller action steps, which could go to the week. Doing something like this might feel very difficult for you, which is why I highly encourage you to think what kind of planning method would work for you. Even if you don't have much free time, could there be a way to divide your week or day a little bit differently to make more time for the things you want? Or are there any ways for you to increase your productivity? I feel like, especially if you do this for long term, it will help you to eventually become way more focused, and you will also start to see all these patterns that you might repeat without realizing. I hope that was at least a little bit helpful for some of you. And when it comes to this actual spread here, I will use these white boxes in the lower part to write those short weekly plans. And then I use this white extra dot paper to create this floating style boxes in your journal in case there's something that you want to write down that doesn't necessarily go anywhere else. But yeah, I think that's it for the planning page. I think the edge decorations ended up giving almost a magical appearance to this page, and it could also work with many different color combinations. Set up the weekly planning section for November. I actually really liked my weekly layout in October, where I had all the weeks almost on this one page. I realized that for some reason it's very helpful for me to see everything in this one space all at once. So that's why I decided to go with something a little bit similar, but we are gonna change up things slightly and also switching this center decoration by using some Dutch door pages again. I used these half circles at the borders, but these are a little bit smaller than the ones we used in the cover page. I think each half circle here was 1 dot wide and 4 in length. And then when we've done the same thing on both sides, it leaves us this pretty blue background to the center. And initially, my idea was to create a circular watercolor painting to glue on top of the blue paper here, but in the middle, and concluded that it would have made these pages too thick. So it would have been very difficult to close and flip over the pages. And since this is the weekly layout where you kind of need to do that a lot, I decided to scratch that idea, and instead we are creating some drawings directly in this blue paper. I started by creating this really minimal dot border following the half circle shapes, and after that we are once again taking out the gold paint and start drawing the brush we used earlier. We're starting to draw these tiny 5 petals in the middle of each flower. So this negative space will help to show the individual kind of blend together a little bit, but in general I think that is a very good idea to try out. Small flowers one by one. Some white and gold dots here at the end. Here looked so pretty, especially when you turn the pages around. So I'm really happy I decided to go with this instead of the watercolor painting. However, now that we have the centerpiece ready, we can move on to set up the weekly layout around it. So as I mentioned, this will be very similar to what I did last month. So we have this task list to the middle, which I can use most of the time because I feel like many tasks I have are something that I won't necessarily finish in one day, and I'm also very bad at sticking to any things around quite really, and then even in some point of the week. However, if you're the type that prefers having a little bit more week on one page, I used some light blue sticker paper I found from my drawer for the task list backgrounds, and I wanted to make these similar shapes, backgrounds and palettes listed on my shop's freebie section. So if you want to print some nice colors for yourself to use, I'll leave a link to that in the description. Anyway, I repeated this exact same layout on the other side out of camera, and now we have all 4 weeks in November ready to go, and there's no setting up required in the middle of the month. However, we still have one more spread left here, and lastly, we're gonna set up the monthly review spread. For any new viewers who might not have seen a review spread like this before, this is something that I include in my bullet journal, a place to check if you could achieve the things you wrote on the doubt, or something that you might need to work on moving forward. I try to always change the questions on these spreads to use these pages for. And again, I think if you keep doing this for at least a few months in a row, myself complaining on these pages is my work-life balance and how I need to improve that. So it definitely can move on to the next month without really even realizing it. But also as a balance for all the more functional stuff here, I also like to keep some records of my favorite things on these pages. So I think it's so fun to see pages like these later and be reminded of some songs or hobbies you were doing in this particular time in your life. I know I didn't really explain the decorations here, but I think these were decorations. But then as the last bigger piece here, we are quickly gonna paint another one of these Shima Enaga birds, and this time we don't even need to paint the wings, so this will be a very simple little painting. I started this from a pencil sketch as always, and after defining all the outlines and details of this picture, so as you can see, the coloring part is pretty quick in this one. We only really need to add some darker shades to the wings on the back and the tail. But after this painting was dry, I cut it out from this paper and followed this by painting 2 of these golden flowers that we can arrange on this blue background with this bird painting. So here I just basically, you could always color these even further, and I think these would look so beautiful with some maybe different shades of blue in the middle, or maybe with some white details. This actually reminded me to decorations with them in the future. Anyway, I also cut out these flowers and then glued everything to this blue background here. And then we'll just finally finishes the review page and the whole November layout. This was quite a contrast to the previous October setup, but I really enjoyed painting all these pretty flower decorations and using all these blue tones that I don't use in my bullet journal that often for some reason. Anyway, I hope you got some new ideas from this, and if you're interested in a digital version of this monthly theme, that will be up on my shop and also on my Patreon in a few days from when the video is going up. If this was your first time around here and you want to stay tuned for more, definitely consider subscribing. But I guess that's it for this time. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having an amazing day or night wherever you are. And see you in my next one. Bye bye.